series of lecture programs, and this is one of our most successful. We have decided to revisit the area. Andover was very fortunate to have that Lake Road extension put in so it can go to Route 6. The state did the development of it, and in the process, when they put the road in, they found the F and Sprague original house. It had been partially destroyed by fire. The roof had fallen in, and then the archaeology team was then put together to help analyze all the material. As a result of this, the roof fell in, and then all the cinders, as a result of that, protected all of the items. So this became one of the largest collection of artifacts of historic homes, and it was a major endeavor for them to put all this together. This program went on probably for about 5-6 years, if not longer. And then this is like looking at a time capsule in time, because this roof neatly covered everything. So we really had there was something like 250,000, no one will tell you how many artifacts, but it was a huge number to put together. So Bruce Collette is here as the chief historian, and Mary Harper is the chief archaeologist, and they're here part of the public archaeology team. They work with more people doing this together. And originally we had a little talk by them when they first collected it, and they gave us the history of it. And had a few artifacts. But this is many years later, and they have now analyzed every item and cataloged it and put them into boxes. So it's a tremendous endeavor. Now this will give us a really good picture of the lifestyle at the time. Now at the conclusion of our talk, we do have refreshments, and we do have some books and you may want to look at, and maps. It's available. And if anyone wishes to join our historical society, we're glad to go. So at this time, I have proposed Bruce Collette and Mary Harper. They will provide our program. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ed. As Ed mentioned, this is our second time here. Closer to the time at which we finished the actual field work, we gave a report to the Andover Historical Society. Now, subsequent to that, we've had time to catalog all the artifacts, analyze all the artifacts, and perhaps equally important, try to understand how they all fit together. We've consulted with outside experts as well. So we've learned a great deal about not only this site, but about how people lived their lives in the early 18th century. This has benefited the scholarship as a whole. The chief historical archaeologist, whose name is also Harper, Meg can explain the relationship if she wants to, but Ross Harper has published a number of articles in scholarly magazines, popular magazines. We have a website about this excavation, and we can clue you in about that as well. So the site is important not just to us as archaeologists and to you as residents of Andover, but it has a larger importance to the gathering of knowledge about colonial lifeways altogether. So I'm just going to start with a little brief explanation on who the Spragues were, and then Meg will take over and start to show you some of those 250,000 artifacts. As Ed indicated, they're all packed away. Most of them are very, very fragile and don't travel well. They're the property of the state of Connecticut, and at some point plans have been made to perhaps have an archaeological repository for artifacts like this, or perhaps even a museum exhibit. But for now, they're safe and in storage. Ephraim Sprague, 1685 to 1754. 1685 sounds like a long time ago, and yet he was actually the fourth generation of Spragues in America. We in Connecticut forget about how far back Massachusetts went relative to our history. This family came from Duxbury, Massachusetts, which is part of the Plymouth colony, first settled by the English in 1620. The Spriggs arrived in Plymouth in 1623, 3 years after the colony was founded. And that colony really developed for 60 years before Ephraim Sprague was born. New towns were set off from Plymouth, Duxbury, Marshfield, etc. And the land that had seemed endless at the time that the Pilgrims arrived had pretty well all been accounted for by that time. Ephraim Sprague's father, John Sprague, was a farmer, weaver, mariner. His grandfather was a farmer and a tavern keeper. His great-grandfather, who was the settler, was a farmer and a tavern keeper. But about the time that Ephraim Sprague came along, people in Plymouth Colony, towns like Duxbury, Plymouth, Marshfield, were looking for other places to settle and start over. And this is really the story that this site talks about, is how people were willing to pull themselves up and move what would have seemed a tremendous distance in those days and start over. This particular family moved from Duxbury to Lebanon in 1703. It was Ephraim Sprague, his brother Benjamin Sprague, and the father, John Sprague. They were solid citizens of Duxbury, but by no means wealthy. Yet when they had sold up their Duxbury possessions, they were able to buy hundreds of acres of land in Connecticut. So there's the trade-off. You're moving from a civilized place to a brand new frontier type place. With just a few acres now you have hundreds of acres. John Sprague, the father, became a prominent man, captain of the militia company, selectman of Lebanon, representative at the general court. And Ephraim Sprague eventually followed in his footsteps. I will say that some of the other Plymouth people were moving out to even more far-flung places. The Kennebec region of Maine, for example, was settled by people from Marshfield about the same time. So these were people on the move. Ephraim Sprague grew up in Lebanon. The family was located more or less in the center part of Lebanon. When he came of age as an adult, he moved to a remote part of Lebanon. Lebanon at that time included the towns of Lebanon, Columbia, and most of Andover. And so he took up lands in what was called the Mile and a Quarter. This was a part of Andover that was disputed land for many, many years. No one settled there because one wealthy family claimed to own it, another wealthy family claimed to own it, and finally the General Assembly, the legislature in Hartford, just kind of made a decision as to the ownership, and it began to be settled. But he took the lands up outside the central part of Lebanon. His brother Benjamin bought land in what became part of Coventry. So they were doing what their father had done. Relocate from Duxbury to Lebanon. They relocated from the center of Lebanon to the more outlying areas. Ephraim Sprague, like his father, was a fairly prominent man. He was captain of the local militia company. He was a deacon of the so-called North Parish or Crank Parish of Lebanon, which now embraces Columbia. And he served as a selectman of Lebanon. He served as a representative to the general court for Lebanon. So he followed in his father's footsteps as someone who the neighbors at least regarded as a prominent person. Now, how prominent was he? In terms of Lebanon and Andover, yes, the Spragues were prominent people, but they didn't really compare to the wealthy people in Hartford and New Haven. It was a kind of a middling situation, certainly better off than many of their neighbors, but in no way were they part of the colonial elite either. When there were enough families in this part of the town to organize their own congregational parish, the Andover Parish, Ephraim Sprague again was in the lead of doing that. And he helped organize the parish that eventually became the town of Andover many, many years later. And he was a deacon of that as well. He was a friend of Eliza Wheelock, the minister in Columbia, who started a school for Indians and eventually moved to Hanover, New Hampshire, and Dartmouth College, and was a leader in his community. He died in 1754. We know a little about him because when somebody died, their possessions were inventoried, probate inventory, and copies of that are in the state library and also in the local probate court. So we know a little bit about Ephraim Sprague from that. But as Meg will indicate, we tend to know a lot more about him because we had the privilege of excavating this area. One of the things that's neat about Andover was that several years ago, many years ago, a citizen by the name of Philip Brass took it upon himself to analyze where all the early property lines were in Andover. And you can see here, slightly shaded Ephraim Sprague's holdings. That was as reconstructed by Philip Brass. So we know in general where his household was. We don't know specifically whether he built his house, where on this property he built his house from the documentary record. That would have to come from the archaeology. And as Meg will explain, this was a house that was probably built around 1705. That's when Ephraim Sprague bought this land. That's the year after he married Deborah Woodworth, and it's the year his firstborn child, Perez, was born. So if he's married and has a child, you can assume that he's setting up household other than in his father's house in Lebanon. And I think that's a reasonable assumption. And some of the neighboring deeds as well refer to the property as where Ephraim Sprague now lives. So 1705, circa 1705, is a good beginning date for this. And he died in 1754. After his death, his second wife, Mary, remarried right away. And in those days, if you were a widow, you got a third of the husband's property, right? But if you then remarried, you were no longer a widow. So then the property went to the children and grandchildren. So she remarried. His eldest son, Perez, relocated to Union, which, relative to Andover, was a frontier area. So again, the family is moving out. Most of the property went to his grandson, Ephraim Sprague III, and shortly after his grandfather died, Ephraim Sprague III moved to Sandusfield, Massachusetts, which is in the foothills of the Berkshires. So again, Duxbury to Lebanon, Lebanon to Andover, Andover to what were then far-flung corners of English settlement. That was the pattern. Now, someone asked, exactly where is this site? Well, this is Merritt Valley Road. This is Route 6. Lake Road formerly ended at Merritt Valley Road, right? It was built through to Route 6. And where it was going to be built through is where the archaeological investigations uncovered the first evidence of a house there. So without further ado, I'd like to ask Meg Harper to come up and show you some of the archaeological process and some of the results of the archaeology.
So one of the things I want to talk about is what were we doing there in the first place? And the reason is because when Connecticut Department of Transportation decided to extend Lake Road, it used federal money. And when you use federal money, or you need a federal permit. Yeah?
Speak up a little bit.
All right, I'm going to try. When you use federal money or have a federal permit to conduct a project, it falls under Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. And that act requires all projects to take into consideration their effects on archaeological and historical resources that are either listed on the National Register of Historic Places or eligible for listing on the National Register. For houses and above ground resources, you can see them, but for archaeological resources, you have to dig to find them. So what we had to do is go in and do an archaeological survey for Connecticut Department of Transportation to find out if there were any buried remains that were significant in the path of the Lake Road extension. And we did that in a phased process, because archaeology is expensive, it's really labor intensive. So we start small, and then we go a little bigger, depending on what we found. So we started in this cornfield, which is, laser pointer, which is what this project area looked like before Lake Road was laid out. And Lake Road went from Merritt Valley Road over here, the extension went over to here, and Route 6 over here. So it was just a cornfield. And what we did is called Phase 1 Archaeological Survey, and we put in about, I think, 29 test pits. And our test pits are shovel test pits. They're about 2 feet by 2 feet square, about 3 to 4 feet deep. And we're sampling just to see what we can find. We found about 100 historic period artifacts from the 18th century. And that was in 1997. And then winter set in. We came in 1998, and we did what's called a Phase 2 survey. And this time we did 169 pits, and we found 3,000 artifacts. Basically, all of them dated to the first half of the 18th century, which is completely consistent with Bruce's research of 1705 to about 1754. We also clipped, you'll see on the left, we clipped in one of the test pits what appeared to be part of a foundation wall or a cellar, fieldstone cellar wall right there. So we opened up a larger unit, which we call a 1 by 1 meter unit. We did actually 3 there, so that we could see if we had a wall of a house or a cellar, and we did indeed. So then we moved on in 1999 to what's called Phase 3 data recovery. And the reason we did this is to remove the archaeological site that was in the road, in the middle of Lake Road Extension. And we did that because the site was determined to be National Register eligible. And CONDOT couldn't figure out a way to actually avoid the site. It didn't want to change the alignment of the road. So we had to remove it. So that involved us going back to where we had found the artifacts and this little spot here, and then removing the topsoil. So we took off the plow zone, basically, and exposed the outline of a cellar, about 16 by 16 feet. And then what you're seeing here is the outside bulkhead entrance. That's the first step to go down. And when you see this dark colored material in there, it's basically soil and stone and 250,000 artifacts that were basically shoved into the cellar when the house burned. And we would determine that it burned by finding a lot of burned artifacts, and that you'll see, in the upcoming slides. Burned down in around the 1750s. And the house was removed. And then everything was shoved into the cellar, taken away, that couldn't fit in the cellar. And then it was converted to an agricultural field, and it stayed that way for 250 years until we came along. Which is pretty amazing when you think about it. Okay, so here we are, we're starting to excavate the cellar. Here's the cellar, and it's full of stone. And see the big giant pile of stone, like literally tons of stone? We took that all out by hand. Everything's done by hand, and then we're only partway through. So what we have here is probably the walls of that cellar were above the ground at one point before they were shoved into the cellar, before it was converted into a field when they took the house down. But it was also chimney fall, and we know that because a lot of the stones that were there had creosote and burn marks on the inside. They came from the inside of a chimney that was pushed into the cellar. But yeah, we moved them all by hand, kept going. Down to here, where we're exposed the steps of the bulkhead entrance that you saw before, and the walls of the cellar. And if you look at this stone here, it's really a pattern. That's the chimney fall. So the chimney is really over here to the left, outside of the view of the screen. But it was pushed in and it fell in this pattern.
Question? Yeah. Who did the pushing?
Who did the pushing?
Oxen, probably.
Oxen, yeah, absolutely.
Was it the neighbors or the grandchildren
It was
or
probably the family.
the family itself? Okay.
Probably the family. And it's not uncommon. We've actually found about 5 sites like this that are completely buried. The houses were removed, either carted away or burned down, and cellar holes filled in, covered over, turned into agricultural fields.
I just wanted to say one of the things. Typically, the stone chimneys were put together with sand mortar, except for the very part that was above the roof, which would have lime mortar. So that they weren't all that well held together.
Right.
But you would definitely need a team of oxen to do the pulling.
Yeah. Yeah, and actually, if I back up a little bit to that slide, this you'll see in another slide. This is the one where we first realized we had a cellar wall here. But when you see the picture in a couple of slides forward, you'll see that it's kind of knocked down. We think that they sledged out the stones from the chimney, a big hearthstone through that way because that was kind of knocked down and the rest of the wall is completely intact. So let's go back to here. So here we are, excavating in the cellar, still, little army. And not only was there chimney fall and basically above ground, foundation stones that were shoved in, there were these big boulders that were pushed in from somewhere. If you're going to turn something into a farm field, the last thing you want is boulders or rocks in your way. So you really want to just fill the hole and make it safe for farming. So we had to move these things around and just work around them. They were too heavy to take out, and we didn't want a machine to come in and pull them up because they would destabilize the walls. So we just moved them around like this crazy person, which is my husband, with this huge crowbar, and which is we called the Bruce bar because Bruce so nicely loaned it to us because the regular crowbars wouldn't work. And it was only last year that Bruce told me that it was actually a railroad tool. So, but I can tell you it worked really well to move the boulders around. But that's what we did. We just shifted them around the whole time. Okay. And here it is all excavated. And you might notice that those big boulders are in something of a depression, and they are, and I'll explain why in a minute. But here are the stairs going down, these beautifully made walls. We walked down those stairs every day, and they didn't even wiggle. They're amazing. Yes?
Where was the chimney on the left
Right
edge?
there.
Oh, right there.
Yep, we're going to talk about that in a second. So these marks here, these striations, these are plow scars. So the plows just clip it as it goes. The top of the foundation wall, but they don't really know it, just barely touching it. You can see the scars there. Because all of this is hand excavation, we don't use machines. So we did finish the excavation, and then we wondered, okay, we have chimney stone, where did it come from? And then we found this very ashy feature about 6 feet north. And you can see the gray there, the ash. And we realized that that really is probably the chimney, and that means this house has to go farther. Even though you don't see any subsurface indications of how it goes farther. That's a close-up of the stairs. They're beautiful, and they're still there, because they filled this foundation, and they built like an extension over it.
This is under the road?
Yes, it is. It is. Isn't that amazing? It was just awesome, I have to say. So we had another surprise when we got to the bottom of the cellar. That cellar floor was built on an ancient sand bed, and it was better sand than at the beach, just amazing. In the sandy cellar floor were 7 food storage pits, and they overlapped each other. 7 food storage pits.
Oh.
So I don't know if you're aware of it or not, but it was not uncommon to store vegetables in pits. You put them there so that they wouldn't freeze in the winter. In fact, the Pilgrims, the first thing they did when they got here was dig up the storage pits full of corn that the Indians had put their corn in and get their food. But colonists did it too. Sometimes they were outside of the house, sometimes they were in the house. But you wanted it to be below the frost line so that it wouldn't freeze. Because you know what happens to your potatoes if they freeze, right? They're just unredeemable. And it's not like you can go to a store and get more. That's it. If your food stores are frozen and ruined over the winter, you're really out of luck. So the Spriggs had the fortune, or the really smart, or they were really smart about it, and they actually put the cellar directly over the sand bank on purpose. But they had their storage pits dug into the floor of this cellar. And here's one of them right here. And this one had been filled in, backfilled. These are 2 pieces of red worm milk pan, and it's kale and pipestem. And you didn't use a food storage pit 2 years in a row, because if you left any organic matter in it for the previous year, it would rot out that year's storage of vegetables. And if you go to Sturbridge Village today and you go to the Red Farmhouse, I think it's the Bixby House, and you look in their root cellar, they open the root cellar periodically, they store all their vegetables in sand. That's what they do. The other great thing about sand is that it keeps rodents away because they suffocate. They go into the sand and they suffocate. So your food storage, your food is saved from freezing and from rodent damage. This is the side view of one of the filled-in storage pits. You can see it there. They just threw some rocks in and just filled it up that way. This is the beautiful sand vein. Look at it. It was perfect. And then this storage pit was obviously open at the time of the fire because it's chock full a huge amount of carbonized material. Here's the cellar excavated, the bulkhead entrance going down, the bit of a damaged wall there, and we're all done with it. And then there's that ash stain again that is the heart. It's about 6 feet away. Okay, so the house goes this way. So we realize we have to follow and see what's going on with this and what's up with the hearth. And the reason you don't see any visible means of extension of the house that to the north this way is because there weren't any. It was built with what's called foundation on ground technique, so the stones were literally a couple layers deep and were laid right on the ground surface. It might have been slightly into the ground surface, but the plow would have kicked them away, and that is actually way more common than you could imagine. We have found that in many places, and there are some standing structures, including one in Andover, I think, that actually is built with just stones on the ground, and it's still standing. Here's a close-up of that hearth. It's really dense with ash. We believe that there had been a really big hearthstone, which would have been a very valuable commodity, that was sledged out of this fire feature because we didn't find one in it. And there was some evidence that had been removed. One of the things about a house burning is that it's just a horrible tragedy for a family like the Spriggs because they basically lost everything. But for an archaeologist, it's a fantasy because, you know, ash changes a soil's pH from acidic to alkaline. So organic remains that normally just disappear due to our acidic soils, they survive. So we found in this heart pig bone, it was this big, and it looked as fresh as if the pig had been slaughtered the day before. It was a racket antler that the tines had been cut off to make tool handles out of, perfectly fresh. It wasn't even fragile. It was just like it was just put there the day before because it just preserved so well.
Did you say a pig?
I did, a pig bone.
Pig bone.
Yeah, there was a lot of bone at the site. But the other part is that what doesn't get preserved through the ash, changing the chemistry of the soil, gets burned and carbonized. So we have carbonized food remains that normally would never survive. And it also means that the family lost so much because so many things break in a fire and then other things burn and become unusable. And people don't go back to retrieve these items, so they're left there for archaeologists to come and find and reconstruct the lifeways at the house. So we moved on farther north, and we found a second cellar. Okay? And this is it. And it's not anything like the other cellar. This is in the northwest corner, and it's a fireplace. It's the second fireplace in the corner. But this cellar is very different in character, but it's part of the same house. So what we figured out was that it's a long house. It's 16 feet by 72 feet long. And that big fireplace in the middle was underneath our truck. That's Lake Road, already built. We went back a couple years later. What happened was, when we finished excavating that fireplace feature that I just showed you, it's basically under our truck there, DOT said that they weren't going to pay for excavation. Sure, absolutely.
I hear you.
I can't do the pointer at the same time, but now that you get that. What happened is that we had figured out that there was a foundation here, another cellar. We knew it was part of the same house. But the Department of Transportation said, we're not going to pay you to excavate the rest of this house because we're not actually going to disturb that. So we had to walk away from it. And it really, really, really gnawed at me. I couldn't stand it. And so about 3 years later, after the road was built, so that must have been 2002, maybe 2001, we asked Mr. Merritt, William Merritt, who owned the property, if we could go back and just take the rest of it out. Because we were afraid it was going to be sold for commercial development. And it was. It's now the Benjamin Franklin Plumbing Company. But then the year after, it turned into that. So we went back and we excavated it out ourselves. And we found the northern end of the house. So this is about, I'm going to say almost 20 by 20. But this half, which is the eastern half, is only about 3 feet 7 inches, whereas the southern cellar was 5 feet deep. And it doesn't have the wonderful stone walls. This is just a crawl space on this half. And then you just got this scooped up fireplace here. So what is this? What it is a long house. So this is the first cellar that I showed you with the wonderful stone walls and the sauce pits. Actually, vegetables were often called sauce in the 18th century, so we're calling sauce pits. And then there's the fireplace, there's the connection, and then there's the northern cellar. Our original interpretation, which I think we talked about, and I talked with, for you guys some years ago, was that we knew it was a longhouse, but we thought there was a cross passage here. And that what this is basically, it's a West Country English cross passage house. It's a style of house that was, those houses are still standing in England, but none are standing in New England. And the Spriggs actually came from the West Country of England. So they brought this style of house with them. It's what they knew. And there is evidence of at least 4 of these based on archaeological data in Plymouth Colony and also in documents, but none are standing. And none have been as fully excavated as this one.
This very long extension,
Yes.
could it function as an attached barn?
That's a really excellent question, because in England, there would have been a barn at one end, and it was kind of the byre, you know, the barn would be at one end, and then the animals would be here, and the people would be there. So what's really neat to me is that Ephraim Sprigg, we don't think everyone went to England and saw one of these houses, but this is in his family history and his family memory, and these are known to have been built in Plymouth, in the Plymouth Colony. So we originally thought it looked just like this with a cross passage here, but after consultation with some of the world's authorities on West Country style houses, we've relocated it and put the cross passage here, because they're typically between the hall and kitchen and the pantry, which is over the southern cellar, and then this was a parlor here. But here's what's really interesting. This is interesting enough, but what's really interesting is that after some close analysis of the artifacts, we think this part of the house was the first house. That was the starter house. So when the Spriggs got here in what, 1703, 1704, 1705, and had to build the starter house, when Ephraim married Deborah, they had to have a house to live in, and they made this expedient house. So we've got a little cellar here with a trapdoor entrance, because there's no stairs and no bulkhead. Trapdoor to the floor. We've got this crawl space right here and this fireplace. A one-room house that they lived in. And the reason we think it's the starter house is that it had 17th century artifacts in it, more than 18th century. And it also, which they would have brought with them from Duxbury, but it also had a very high proportion of wild game, wild animal.
Bone?
Yep, animal bone. Bear, raccoon, deer, skunk, see, grouse, turkey, all sorts of wild animal bones are in this cellar. But when you come here on the frontier and you have to make your farm, you've got to make your farm fields. You've got to put in your crop. You don't have any domestic animals. You don't have any corn. You've got to wait a year at least till you can have it. So in the meantime, Spriggs are hunting their own food, and that's what we have in that cellar. And so that's why we think that's the starter house. And then pretty quickly thereafter, once they got their farm established, they extended the house into this format that they're very familiar with. And in this cellar, there's all sorts of domestic animal bone. So
Like the pig.
pig, cow, yeah, chicken, and sheep. So that is our newest and I think our best interpretation of this site. So what was the starter house became the parlor. Some of the stuff that burned. Here we have some charred boards, and see little white pieces of artifacts there? Those are part of a tea set. It's the latest dating artifact from the site. It's an English white salt glaze stoneware, scratch blue, big long name, tea set. Very fragile item. We probably went down to Norwich to get it. And tea drinking just became popular in the 1750s, both in England and in America. And it's probably might be the last thing that the Spriggs bought before this house burned down. There's your food. So we're talking about hickory nut potatoes, like 24 carbonized potatoes. We don't know of any others that were found in New England, and corn, and oats. So down in the southern cellar. Fascinating. And a little bit about food waste. That's redware. Because everything got burned or was heat damaged, we did our best to put everything back together, but you can see some sort of bubbling up of that regular bowl. I want to talk a little bit about how people ate in the first half of the 18th century. That's a Delftware bowl. It's a punch bowl. But there was a lot of communal sharing of eating in the first half of the 18th century. So that's not a punch bowl in the way we think of punch bowls today, where we have a ladle and then we each have a cup and we have our punch. That's passed around and everybody drinks out of it. That's a punch bowl in the 18th century. That's a posset pot. Normally it would be really nicely yellow, but it was burned. It had another handle on this side. And posset was also a shared, a posset pot was also a shared vessel. You pass it around. And posset was like eggnog, but with like 30 more eggs in one cup. Really, really thick stuff. This is the tea set. Yeah, the teapot, the creamer. There were actually 6 saucers and 4 tea bowls. We don't know what happened to the other 2 tea bowls, and we put it back together. Normally that black you see would be a cobalt blue, really beautiful, vivid blue.
Did that come from England, actually?
Yes, yep, definitely. And this is, meals were also one pot or one bowl fare. So especially if you've got a family with a lot of kids. So these are baking dishes, and the typical thing would be like the 4 and 20 blackbirds make a pie. So you have a meat pie with any kind of meat you want to put in there, or fruit.
Excuse me,
Yep.
on those, there's little
Yes,
marks
those are,
on the,
yeah, those are, every single artifact that we find gets an individual number. It
okay.
goes into a database, and records exactly where it came from on the site, you know, how deep, horizontally and vertically, so we know exactly where it came from. So I can press a button and make a map and
I
find
didn't
out
know if it-
everywhere.
I didn't know if it was the maker's mark.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
that's a good question. Actually, it's a very good question. This is the outside of the vessels where there are scorch marks, not from the fire, but from actually using it in hearth cooking. That's the inside of the same vessels. And they're glazed so that they could be water permeable. That's a pudding pan. Yeah, a pudding pan, another, you know, make a big bunch of pudding, which wasn't necessarily dessert. And that's a milk pan, regular milk pan. You know, you milk the cow and the milk is warm and you put it in the cooling pan. Cream goes to the top, you make the butter out of it and the milk turns into cheese or you drink it. But what's neat about that, this one is, look at those. This cracked and it was mended with 2 holes.
Where would that pottery have come from?
That came from the pantry over the
But
subway
means
cellar.
origin.
Where was it?
Oh, the
Did they-
origin? Redware? That probably came from England at
You
this
think
time,
it came from
probably.
England as
Yeah,
well?
redware started to be made here pretty early, but it's very hard to tell where redware came from because it's just, unless it's got a maker's mark or a certain design, it's really tough to tell.
Is there some pottery coming from the colonies?
From the colonies?
Or, well, from Plymouth or?
I don't think they got it from there. I think it's more likely he went to Norwich and got it. There's even new evidence of redware potteries in Charleston, Mass, and in Plymouth or Plymouth Colony, even in the late 17th century. But it's just new developing knowledge. We don't know enough about it yet, really. But these 2 holes are really interesting because imagine trying to drill a hole through a flower pot. Wouldn't you shatter it? You know, it's so friable, redware is so friable. But what they did is they biconically drilled it, like just the way Indians make wampum. So they took a little hand drill and they went from each side, slowly from opposite sides to get to the middle so they wouldn't shatter the pan, the vessel. Then they bound it with a wire or lashed it, and then they plugged the holes with lead. And we have found mended vessels like this on at least 5 of our historic house sites. So it wasn't uncommon. That's I call Yankee thriftiness. Don't waste anything, right? So some individual things for eating are knives and forks, and knives are always rounded in this period, and forks were 2-tined.
What's the scale on the bottom?
Metric,
Millimeters.
millimeters, I think.
Centimeters, actually.
Centimeters, yeah, centimeters.
Centimeters.
So it looks like 5 centimeters for the whole scale. Which I personally hate, even though in archaeology everybody uses the metric system, I can't think that way. Spoons. That's a 17th century spoon. That came from the north cellar, the starter house. And then the rest of these spoons sort of gradually go up in age up to the mid-17th century, mid-18th century when the house burned.
The mid-18th century would have been done here?
The spoons? No.
No, they'd
No.
still be imported
Yeah, absolutely.
mid-8, okay, yeah.
Yeah. The sprigs actually even though they did a whole lot of hunting and fishing when they first got here, they continued to get wild game. So they continued to hunt, and they had a mix of wild animal food and as well as domestic animal food. And these are fish hooks and then lead sinkers on the left, line weights. Lead's so easily moldable, you can do it yourself to make your line weights. A lot of hunting, gun flints, musket balls, side plate to a gun, and shot. And continuing the Yankee frugality and just the way people lived is most people made, or repair their own clothing. So here we found a big set of shears, not all of it there obviously, small set of scissors, embroidery scissors, thimbles, and all, the pins, and then this bone needle case. The upper two items are book clasps, which are homemade. So some are crudely cut out, probably out of a brass kettle that no longer had any use. And books were valuable, and book clasps kept your books safe. And this is a inkwell on the right, and a lead pencil here, and then a fragment of an eyeglass. Somebody wore glasses. And I believe that the Sprague had several books in his probate. Am I right, Bruce?
That's right.
Right. So in the first half of the 18th century, people did not wear ostentatious clothing. It was really frowned upon. There are some wonderful references to French delegates or French aristocratic Frenchmen visiting Governor Trumbull, for example, in Lebanon, and even Governor Samuel Huntington, and being shocked at how drab their clothing was and how old-fashioned their clothing was. But, we in New England don't go in for that sort of thing. We didn't go in for it then, but you could differentiate and just kind of, accentuate your outfit with accessories like these. These are buttons. And that's a 17th century button. These are all 18th century varieties. They're embossed. And then look at that beautiful blue. And then this is clear, set in. This one's really lovely because it's raised up and then it's got this kind of concave top to it. They're really beautiful, beautiful items. You can make a little bit of this individuality statement with your buttons. We actually found charred cloth at this site, which is incredible because it never survived. In fact, we don't know of any other cloth that has survived in a site for the first half of the 18th century, but it did because it burned, carbon burned. And this is homespun. And we believe that the Spragues made the cloth because they had the spinning wheel. And Dr. Sprague City was a weaver. So we think this is cloth made in the home. Another way to show your individuality is knee buckles. These are beautiful with the little florets here. They're green because they're copper. And then this one had these glass sort of vessels in them. They look green because of the copper, but they were actually glass. But they're pretty snazzy for a knee buckle. And another way is cufflinks. So a little jewel, it's really glass here and here. And what's interesting to me is that a lot of these cufflinks have kind of a agricultural motif. Like this almost looks like a corn stalk drawing. This is floral. That's vaguely floral. Really beautiful. This is a hook and eye closure, and that's an aglet. You know that plastic thing on the end of your shoelaces so you can tie your shoelaces better? Ours are plastic, theirs are metal. That's what that is. This is my favorite artifact of the site. This is a little saw, about this big, and it's handmade out of a cut-up brass kettle. And it's a little saw for dovetailing woodworking. So, that means he cut up an old kettle that he couldn't use anymore because here's a kettle that had been repaired. When he finally couldn't do anything else, he cut it up and he made a tool out of it. So then he could make something, out of wood with his dovetail saw. And he made a hasp, which is like a little latch also. And I love that because I like to think about Sprague as being the captain of a militia, being a deacon, entertaining in his parlor with his tea set, and then he goes in his basement and he makes all this cool stuff, that's out of public view. And to me, that's the beauty of mixing archaeology with history. because you can find out with documents, you know, who the person was, when were they born, when did they die, what were their occupations, what did they do, which routes did it. But then with archaeology, you can find out how they really lived, what was on their table, what did they eat. You know, there's so much to learn and it fleshes out it all. So when we get to do both, it's just a wonderful result. We were privileged to do this. And, thank you for having us. Any questions?
You actually found no money there, correct?
How about you? You always find some coins at a site, you know.
One little question.
Yes.
With all of this coming from here, I'm thinking about Machu Picchu. Will we ever get any of these back to
Well,
Andover?
that's such a good question, because Connecticut has a problem in that we don't have a repository for artifacts that are removed with state funds. So if you're in Rhode Island, and the Rhode Island DOT had to pay for it, they have a wonderful, incredible storage facility, and they also loan us for exhibits, but we don't have that in the state of Connecticut. We don't at all. So all artifacts here are supposed to go to the state archaeologists for their facilities, but they don't have enough room. So we actually have this material on loan basis, so we can keep it safe, because there's no secure place at the state archaeologist's office right now. It's a barn down on Hurstbarn Hill, and there's nobody watching over anything. So it's secure where we are in climate control conditions. But what we'd really like to see in the future, and what we proposed to DOT at the time, but they didn't want to do it, was that a permanent exhibit be made that's safe, you know, and locked and secure, and preferably in Andover. It would be a nice thing to do. You guys should think about writing a grant to get that exhibit done, because they're available.
Yeah, what Meg alluded to at the start, and I just want to emphasize here, is from the DOT's perspective, their job is to get the road built. The federal government requires them to do archaeology, and they do it, and they're happy to do it. But the type of follow-up that the question implies, now you've got all this great stuff, who's ever going to see it? We can't even see it because it's packed away in our cellar. You know, it should be available to the public. And you know, at some time in the future, I think that's going to happen.
I do. I think they're going to get there because all the old guard retired. So there's a wonderful group of people in the division of DOT that handles this, and they are all really in favor of public exhibits and permanent exhibits. There are only problem now is that the state has no money. As we all know, we're pretty broke.
So we try to do things like taking this slideshow around. There's also a website just on this one site, and you can go look at that. And there's pictures of lots of the good. If you Google Ephraim Sprague Archaeological Site, it will pop up.
And it's amazing, and we did get DOT to pay for that because it's an awesome website.
And if you go to the website, there's a little activity where you can try to put this picture together. Because this picture is in about a couple dozen pieces,
Yeah, really, see
and
if
it
you
was
can do that.
cross-mended. And it shows you the individual pieces, and you can try to put it together.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's really
Gives you an
neat.
idea of
And
what's
Bruce
happening.
did that website himself, and it's awesome. It's so professional.
You know, using what you've figured out from these various
Right.
digs that you've done and so forth, and I know there's been a couple other sites
Yes.
that were pretty remarkable too. What makes sense? Where would a reasonable location be for a museum where we could put a number of these exhibits?
Well, you know, we've done exhibits. We do actually design and build exhibits. We have a guy who builds them for us, and we've done a number in which we've encased artifacts and lucite built into the exhibit. We did a 4-panel exhibit this morning at Fort Trumbull State Park. Some big New York design firm did the rest of it, but we got 4 panels to do a wonderful exhibit that work we had done there where the Pfizer building was built. And we encase things in lucite so that they're stable and they'll be there forever. It's a permanent installation. We also did an exhibit for the town of Newtown, and it was really neat because what we did there was something that might be suitable for Andover. We did 6 panels each, and a triptych. So you have these 3 panels, and they can hang on a wall. They include artifacts, and they can take them off of a wall, and then you can make them into a kiosk, and it can stand, so it can move. It moves around town. So we can go to the library, you can go to the town hall, you can go to schools. There's lots of public works department will put it in the pickup truck or van and take it around. It can go to multiple venues. And that was actually, pretty reasonably priced, and you got some real longevity out of it.
What would it take for this site to put together panels? I mean, like, how many panels would it take to be reasonable to show the better artifact?
Probably, in this case, you might want panels and a few display
Yeah,
cases.
I think you
You want a place to, a secure but public place to put them. I don't know what your public library facilities are. I know like town hall spaces at a premium there.
do. Right.
So that would be the first thing, is determining what kind of public space you would have for it. Like, where was the new town thing first?
Well, the first place it went to of all places was the public building at the sewage treatment plant of all places. But believe it or not, it's actually a awesome building. But that's where it went first, because we had happened to have done a sewage system project.
Or
But then it
schools.
goes around.
Yeah.
Goes to
If
schools.
one of your schools had space for it where it was gonna be reasonably secure. Not that, these things are all broken and put back together, so, the intrinsic value of them is far less than the educational and informational value. But still, you don't really want somebody, messing
No,
with
because
them.
it's irreplaceable. That's the thing. It may not have monetary value, but it cannot replace it.
I think what we're getting at here is, though, what would really be nice is if part of the whole process would be that there would be a source of modest funds for your local historical society, the ones that had a place to put this, to just put something from it.
Right.
We're in the same situation at the Mansfield Historical Society, where the university did a big excavation for a house, and we saw the slideshow. We didn't do that, some other firm did. We saw the slideshow, but it would be neat to have one of our museum rooms devoted to that stuff.
Right.
But there's no in-place automatic mechanism that makes it happen. Each one is a special case. The state's doing a thing at Fort Trumbull. The sewerage district in Newtown had some money they were willing to put toward this, probably for public relations purposes, who knows. It's just always been on an ad hoc basis.
We'll say, though, that I think that since we did this site, some of the federal agencies have changed their way of thinking, because we actually just finished excavating a 17th century version of this in Plymouth Colony. Which is amazing, and that was under a different federal agency, but we were able to convince them to pay for the town to have a really gonzo exhibit.
Who exactly do we apply to get some temporary exhibits or something?
Well, Connecticut Humanities Council
Right.
might be one source.
Connecticut Humanities Council?
Right. They do history exhibits.
They have control over these artifacts?
No.
No.
Connecticut Department of Transportation
But
has
we do.
control over that.
We do on behalf.
But like I say, their interest is in roads, and when a project is done, it's done.
What if the local historical society wanted to apply to get some temporary exhibits, say into its museum or whatever?
Yeah, if you had a place for them, you could actually go through us, and we would put you in contact with the people there that...
Do you?
Yeah, oh, sure. Yeah. Did you bring some cards?
I did.
Good.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Yeah, I did.
Thank
Yep.
Yeah.
What's the procedure in approving a site like this one?
On approving one?
To prove it, that that's the actual site?
You mean to prove that what it is, or to prove it's National Register eligible?
To prove that it was this particular site?
Well, first of all, there's never anything that you can call proof. It's a series of converging clues. So you have the documentary research of Philip Brass that looked at every deed in Coventry, Andover, Lebanon, etc., and was able to figure out whose property was what. And there are records about the Sprague so that we know some things about them. But until you invent your time machine, You know, it's never gonna be 100%, but it's 99%.
Yeah, it's a quandary.
This is, I'll tell you though, there are some ambiguities, like, okay, Sprague, but he had children, he had adult children. We know that an existing house on Merritt Valley Road was associated with the Sprague family. So, you know, what is the sequence? Well, archaeologically, Meg was able to find a sequence that seemed to show early artifacts, then later artifacts. The physical evidence shows the house burned. Did it burn shortly before Ephraim Sprague died or shortly after? We'll never know that. We do know that his son Ephraim Jr. disappears from the record rather precipitously. Was that a result of the fire? We'll never know that until we get the time machine fired up. Yes?
Could you talk to us about the other house on Merritt Road that is associated with the Spragues? Because I think it does have a label on it, saying it's a Sprague house.
It does.
It is, and that's right. That was part of that
That-
large lot of land
Okay.
that Ephraim Sprague acquired in 1750 and so
I don't
forth.
know who that house is attributed. I know it's a Sprague house, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not
Anybody
sure
know
which
what the
one.
date
Which
is?
Yeah.
house is it? Is it
Merritt
the
Valley.
corner of Merritt Valley and Lake
Yeah.
Road?
Yeah.
1713 is the
Seven-
date.
Is that your house?
Yes.
Yes,
And,
okay.
and what is the name on that? It's not Ephraim Sprague, is it?
No.
It might be.
It was,
It's
originally
just
was a Sprague house with the.
It's a Sprague.
Then it was
Yeah.
with the Merritts.
I guess the
Sprague
question
Merritt.
too
Merritt
is,
had it
where did
before
Sprague
my
go
husband.
after the house?
But what was this Sprague
If it
name
burned
attributed? Was it
before
Ephraim?
his death, yeah.
That I'm not
Right.
sure.
Okay,
In which case, I might want to date that house 1750 or so.
right.
So, you know, I had enough to do to research this one without researching the other one. So I can't tell you exactly about that, other than that it's generally on this property that Philip Brass identified as the parcel that Sprague put together. Yes, sir.
How many acres would you guesstimate that they had originally?
Something on the order of 100.
That
But
was it?
I think so, 100, 150, but don't hold me on that, because this is a long time ago.
That was all?
We've had some discussion within the Historical Society about the Merritts. Did the Merritts claim any of these artifacts, and does their family have any of the artifacts?
No, they don't. In fact, they were absolutely lovely. William Merritt was so wonderful. And William Merritt, although not a Sprague, his middle name was Sprague. So it was William Sprague
Oh, I didn't
Merritt.
know.
Yes, his
So
father's
this
name.
is Bill Merritt,
Yeah,
right?
Bill Merritt.
Oh, for
He
God's
was
sake.
so lovely. And my understanding is that his father had taken care of some other family Sprague members, and he grew up in that Sprague house, your house, grew up in that house. And so he was named with his middle name as that, and he felt a connection to the Sprague family. It was really hard for him to move to Lebanon. He told me he moved to Lebanon because his wife didn't want to live in Andover. I don't know why, but he moved to Tobacco Road in Lebanon, and he would come out and visit us on the site, and because and we got to know each other really well, and I considered him a really good friend, and he passed away a few years ago, but he gave us permission to go and do the North Cellar, you know, and he told us to keep all the artifacts together because he said the one thing good that came out of the incredibly stressful process of him losing his land to another take by DOT, because it was the third take, it was the family farm by DOT. It was so stressful that his one consolation is that we found this awesome site, so that all the stories that he'd heard about the Spragues growing up, he got to actually see it unfold. So he was a frequent visitor, and he was a really lovely man.
I believe I have the original deed as to when the Merritts bought from the Spragues. The Merritts were my family, and I have
Okay, all right.
deeds going way back.
Are you related to Bill?
Yeah, he was our second cousin.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so we grew up on Lake Road, and my grandparents were down at the end, and Uncle George was, called him Uncle, well, his dad was Uncle George, but, and my great-grandfather lived just down on the other side of Merritt Valley. So,
Whit?
Whit, that was my dad. We lived on Lake
Oh, that
Road.
was, okay.
Yeah, and Eldridge.
And theoretically, if that was the case, you were supposed to record the deed with both towns, but it didn't always happen. So if you're researching anything on the border of Andover Coventry, also go look at the Coventry deeds, because you might
These
find,
are all right there on
find
Merritt
it.
Valley.
yeah, and you're talking about the original deeds.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm talking about the ones that are recorded in the town hall.
Right,
Yeah, because sometimes they didn't record in both towns.
because my grandfather got his land for $1 and other considerations.
Right, yeah.
You know?
Avoid the tax man.
But $1 back then was a lot of money.
Yeah, but it was,
You had to work awful hard for that $1.
When you excavated, did you go where the railroad tracks were? Anywhere near there?
We were near there, remember?
we were near there,
But
but
there
we didn't,
wasn't
But,
we
in
didn't,
that area?
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
yeah, it was very
The
close
railroad
to.
was really on the other side of where the extension was put through. And then, you know, it crosses Merritt Valley on a trestle.
Right,
Oh, not a trestle, but a, you know, girder bridge, yeah.
yeah.
We have found Ephraim's and an immediate family down a couple generations graves over at the old Center Cemetery.
Okay,
So we know who of that family was actually buried there. But our impression is the family just disappeared.
It did.
we did
Is
kind
there
of disappear.
anybody around, or does anybody know of any descendants of that Sprague family around today at all?
My understanding is that his brother Benjamin Sprague, that settled in Coventry, has got descendants, or had descendants for many, many years. There were Spragues in Coventry. I don't know if there still are or not.
Yeah, they went over, some went over to Litchfield County and,
And,
New York
Yeah.
State.
and up.
right, and P-Raz went to Union, and there were Spragues there for many years.
Yeah.
Uh,
But we can't find any. Does anybody know of any descendants or descendantry of that family?
I'm not sure there were.
Yeah.
Because the grandson, of course, went to Massachusetts, so.
Are the
Yeah.
Merritts at all related directly, or is it just a matter of buying the land?
Just buying the land, yeah, no relation.
I have a question about the three-dimensional look of the house. You may have seen a picture or a drawing of one of these West Country houses from England. Were they a 1.5 story with like a sloping thatched roof in England? Did they approximate a New England Cape Cod?
Yeah, they were generally kind of narrow to really call them capes, but they were generally a single story tall. But there's the limit of archaeology, right? You can say a lot about the footprint,
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
but it's a little harder to say much about
talking
how many
about-
stories.
Right, but you're talking about seeing what's in England, and you know, in a way, you're right about the looking like a cape, because the sloped roof and just the single story, really. But you know, if you go on the internet and you Google West Country houses, and there's also a wonderful new book out by Carrie Carson, that is, and who is basically the world's authority on West Country architecture. He's a retired vice president of research at Colonial Williamsburg, and a wonderful mentor of ours. He wrote a wonderful book that's new on West Country houses, and you can see the whole variety of them. You know, and some still have the sort of the barn fire at the end, but often those are converted to pantries. The animals aren't really people.
Yeah, the
anymore.
closest thing still around here is the old mid-1700s cave, which I lived in at one time, or like Penny's house. And generally, all of them had the outside bulkhead with the stone stairs.
Right.
And a room where you could just barely stand in the cellar, but the house went twice as far as the
Right.
cellar.
Yeah.
Because
And the
excavating was
deeper
hard.
part
Who
of the
wants to dig,
cellar-
right?
Yeah, and the deeper part of the cellar usually faced south.
Yeah.
Well, that would be true in this case.
And it was, and then, but the chimney, at least in the house I lived in, was in that room.
Yeah.
And beyond it was the stone, the free stone, couple stone high foundation under the house.
That would be a difference from this, because it's
Yeah.
pretty clear that the chimney was
Was
not.
beyond it.
Right.
That,
Right.
I
And that's what distinguishes the West Country cross passage, though, is you've got that cross passage right in front.
Yeah.
Excuse me, it's
That's-
called West
Country
Country
Cross passage.
Yeah,
Cross.
that's puzzling me because all the houses that I know of here in Andover that are still standing, the chimney is in the cellar
Right.
room.
And it's in the center of the mass
And
of
it's
the
in the
house.
center, it's
Yes.
not hung on an outside
Right.
wall.
Correct.
Like this looks like it might have been.
Only
Right.
the northwest corner one, but then
Yeah.
the big central one is different. But if you see, we have none left standing, but England doesn't knock its buildings down
Yeah.
like we do, you know? And you can see them on the website, or get that book, the book by Carrie Carson's really, it's really incredible. and it's
What's the
really
name of the
reasonably
book?
priced. I can't remember.
Oh.
I
Carrie
can't remember.
Carson.
Carson, like Kit Carson.
Yeah,
Carrie, like Cary Grant.
Yeah, it might be Carrie Carson
Oh.
and Nate Alcock, but there are many books that are on West Country architecture, so it's pretty easy to find. Yes?
Did I understand correctly that you found all these animal bones in the oldest part of the cellar, the oldest cellar?
Actually, there are both.
In
So
both.
they're
Well,
both.
they found more of the wild animal bones
Right.
in the north part, and
Well, actually, it's not so much that there were more, it's that they were
proportionately.
proportionally. Right.
was-
Well,
yeah.
why were they actually throwing the bones of the animals they had eaten in their own cellar, or were these pushed in along with other refuse from outside the house?
So what would happen is that you'd throw that stuff like in the ash of the fireplace and then dump, then oftentimes there would be like a place on one side of the fireplace that you could sweep the ashes into.
And they might drop into the cellar where they could be used for soap making,
They could be, or they could just
ash or
accumulate.
fertilizer,
But
yeah.
they did so much. Well, first we have to understand that trash disposal out of your house
Yeah.
in the 18th century was literally outside your door and outside your window. It was just, when I think about that period, I just think about how everything smelled. I really do. I'm kind of obsessed with the idea of how much everything smelled, because it's just outside. And that would be even true if you're fairly wealthy. Your garbage was just right there, that's it, you know? But bones in the fireplace, that might have happened just because of when it actually, the house burned down. But it is absolutely true that Ephraim Sprague used, that we found the rack of antler and they'd sawn off the tines. So he had it downstairs so that he could make tools with it. And you could use, animal bone for all sorts of stuff. You can make tools out of that.
Make buttons out of
You
them.
can make buttons, yeah. You're basically reusing every part of the animal. I mean, think about it. You get a chicken and you have feathers for quills. You got or turkeys, pillows, stuffing, bedding. Just use everything. So that's just stuff that we don't do anymore.
You mentioned finding some bear bones.
Yeah.
Find any other interesting bones that animals that are no longer here, like moose or anything like that?
Like what?
Moose.
No, not moose. No. No.
But I would like to try the skunk.
Yeah. What's interesting is how many small birds there were. So like bobwhite. Who eats bobwhite? No. But then again, you put in small birds into a pie.
Sure.
So and you can trap them, with these
Nets.
really nifty nets.
I used to
Oh, and
get
there's
birds with nets.
passenger pigeon. A lot of passenger pigeon now extinct.
Yeah, the Spragues did their part too.
Yeah.
Any suspicions about sources of water, well? Were they?
There was a well.
Actually, there was a well.
There was a well.
Somewhere in there.
I'll get that.
Yeah, there was a well. Just outside where it should be. It's not far from the bulkhead entrance in the south cellar. And it's exactly where the cross passage was, where you walk up nice and easy to the well. And not only that, outside of the house, there was actually an outside hearth where you would do some of the really nasty work on hearth, render fat,
Right.
dyeing,
Okay.
laundry.
Oh, I see the
So there was the new part of the house, the cross, where's the cross area? They have,
Watch out, Marm's dangerous piece. There's the cross passage.
Okay, so if this is the starter house, why was the well so far away? Maybe they weren't using a well, maybe they were hauling water. But remember, the stream,
Sure, the brook
which was
is
known
right
as
there.
Blackman's Brook or Sprague Brook,
right.
is closer here, so maybe that means the water table
Absolutely.
Was closer.
Yes, it's, and that's typical, that soil is typical, that's why Connecticut has so many wonderful sand banks, all in that area. We've had
Yeah.
excavation done on Harp River. There was excavation off of Route 6 because it was very, very sandy, and but also very nice little rocks every year tumble down, but that was further up the hill.
Yeah, it's true though, when we first went on site in that first slide I showed you, if you look down the field, you could see there was a rise, and it's just sand.
Yes,
So-
wonderful
Yes,
grass.
ma'am?
Yes.
On that drawing, you've got the new part, the newer part where you said that there was the root cellar.
Yeah, this is where the root cellar.
Yeah, right,
was,
all right. And then the next piece is crossover. Now, what is crossover?
Cross passage. Typically in these houses, you would have a door to each side, to the outside, and that would be your major inside-outside door, and then you could go into the
Okay,
rooms
now,
to the side.
just going up a little bit more, the colored in area.
Was
right
where the
there,
fireplace
right there.
was, where the ash stain was.
The fireplace.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's where the fireplace was.
The main chimney, yes.
Main chimney, okay.
Yeah,
So
it
it,
is
they,
just
it had two chimneys then.
It did, yeah,
One there,
surprisingly.
one there.
Could you tell where the fire started? I assume it was,
Not
I
really.
think Bruce down here, much more burned stuff here than here, but for everything burned. But it might just be a factor that this is so much deeper, more got pushed into here. It's hard to say.
Did
you Yes,
find like nails that were?
Oh, tons of nails.
Right, but could you tell the heat difference,
Oh,
No.
the effect of the fire on them?
Not really.
yeah,
They're all
I don't know if there is a technique for doing that or not, but we certainly preserved a lot of nails, and hopefully, if there ever is a technique for that, then they could do it.
Well, we
I mean,
did-
that's one reason for preserving all these artifacts, is they
Right,
can get restudied.
right.
But, iron is pretty susceptible to, especially if it gets hot, it's pretty susceptible to corrode. And so a lot of these were pretty well rusted.
Yeah, the iron was the worst preserved, it didn't like the soils.
The archaeologist took out a sickle, and it was so interesting because as it was exposed with the brushes and everything, you could see that it was the sickle. But it wouldn't come out as a whole blade. It just came out as tiny.
But you know how we took it out? We didn't want to just pick up pieces, so we basically built a box around it and took it out like that in a box. And then we brought it into our conservation lab, and we had our conservator actually excavate it out of the box so that she could make sure the pieces don't fall apart much more. She solidified it as she took it out.
But as it was in the ground, it was just an image of a sickle more than that.
But now it's a sickle, because we saved it, so that was really great.
Now, we didn't do that kind of conservation on every iron artifact because, as we said, there's thousands of them, but a lot of them, they did.
Yeah, we did.
could you tell me if the Old Town Hall is a feasible place to put the artifacts or no?
Well, that would be great, because that's your history
It would
museum.
be great. We'd have to
Yeah.
have security, and we'd have to have a reasonable degree of climate control. You know?
Yes, sir.
Yes, is there any indication of any other buildings that may have been around the house, or what was around the house, like other
That's a good
tools?
question.
That's a real good question. How would you normally do that with
Actually,
more stripping, right?
we actually, well, we did look for that. We actually excavated quite a bit around this, because you probably figured out by now we're kind of berserker with this stuff. So we went all around to look for remains, because there were probably barns, an outhouse, a privy, probably outside.
Yeah, we were really hoping for a privy.
Right, but the problem is that they don't have subsurface foundations, there's no cellar and barns, so whatever evidence there was of them, was probably, destroyed
Might
by
have plowed
plowing.
away.
Right, but we did at the very end, when we literally, Route 6 was being widened and they were putting in that bike path or something along, at the same time, and the bulldozers were literally right behind us. We actually got those guys to come over and we stripped we took the topsoil off of the machine of what we couldn't do to hopefully see if we could find any other evidence of any other buildings, but there was nothing else.
So you found no other indication? of-
No indication, it doesn't mean that they weren't there.
No.
Right.
Because a lot of times, as Meg said, buildings would just be on pads or posts sunk in the
Right.
ground or something like that. And when you consider the 2 feet of plow zone that, you know,
So is there any likelihood that there could be other stuff still out there? It's,
I would say it'd be a long shot.
It would be a long shot.
Plus you'd have to, I don't know who owns that now.
Well, now it's plumbing.
Yeah,
Now it's Benjamin.
they might not know what you do.
Exactly. But you know, the moral of this story though is that, you know, where's Ephraim Gregg's father's house? Where's his brother's house?
You mean in Lebanon?
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, the point is that these house sites are buried all over the place. And, you know, the only way you find them is by doing archaeology. You know, we went on to find
And get lucky.
five more buried in the fields. So they're everywhere. You just have to be really looking.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.